In this shocking near-death experience, ND, a man is taken to the afterlife and receives a startling warning. He meets a figure claiming to be Prophet Muhammad, who tells him about the lies of Islam and the truth about what happens after death. Stay with us as we unravel a journey that challenges everything we thought we knew about life, death, and eternity. Watch to the end and don't miss a message that could change your life forever. I never thought that my life would change in a single moment. My name is Goran, and I'm 45 years old. I was living in a small, quiet town in Serbia, far from the hustle and bustle of city life. My home was nestled in the countryside, surrounded by fields that stretched for miles, and a cool breeze that always reminded me of simpler times. Life here was slow and peaceful. I worked as a carpenter, following in the footsteps of my father, a simple trade but one that gave me purpose. I had never been a particularly religious man. I knew the basics of Orthodox Christianity, having grown up in a Christian household, but like many others, I drifted away from faith. It wasn't that I didn't believe. It was more that life got busy, and I didn't think much about God, salvation, or the afterlife. My wife, Milena, would remind me from time to time to go to church, but I always found an excuse. Too tired, too busy, too many things to do. Everything changed one cold evening. I remember the details clearly. I was in my workshop, finishing a table for a neighbor. The sky outside had turned a deep dark blue as the sun disappeared behind the hills. There was a storm brewing. The wind howled through the trees, and I could hear the occasional roll of thunder in the distance. As I worked, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pain at first, more like pressure, as if something heavy had been placed on my chest. I ignored it, thinking it was just fatigue. But the pressure grew stronger, and soon it became pain. Sharp, searing pain that shot down my left arm. I dropped the hammer I was holding and clutched my chest, gasping for air. My heart was racing, and I knew something was terribly wrong. I stumbled out of the workshop and called for Milena. She came running, panic written all over her face. "I think it's my heart," I managed to say between gasps. She grabbed the phone and called for an ambulance, but deep down, I knew that help wouldn't come in time. The pain was unbearable, and my vision blurred. I collapsed on the floor, clutching my chest as everything around me faded into darkness. The last thing I remember was Melina's voice, calling my name, and then nothing. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in my workshop anymore. At first, I thought I had woken up in a hospital, but this place was nothing like any hospital I had ever seen. It was dark, yet somehow I could see everything around me. The air was thick and heavy, and there was an eerie silence, the kind that makes your skin crawl. I stood up, my chest no longer in pain, but something felt off. I looked down at my body and realized that I wasn't wearing the clothes I had on before. Instead, I was dressed in a simple white robe. I turned around, expecting to see Melina or the paramedics, but I was alone. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice echoing in the emptiness. As I took a few steps forward, the ground beneath me seemed to shift. It wasn't solid like the earth I knew. It was as if I was walking on air, yet I wasn't floating. It was a sensation I had never experienced before, and it filled me with a sense of dread. Suddenly, in the distance, I saw a figure approaching. At first, I couldn't make out who it was. The figure was shrouded in a faint light, but as it came closer, I recognized the face. It was a man with a long beard, dressed in robes that seemed ancient, as though he had stepped out of a time long forgotten. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The man stopped a few feet away from me and looked me in the eyes. His gaze was piercing, and for a moment, I felt as if he could see right through me. He raised his hand and spoke in a voice that was calm yet filled with authority. "I am Muhammad." I stared at him, unable to speak. Muhammad, the prophet of Islam? What was he doing here? This made no sense. I had heard about him, of course, but I had never paid much attention to his teachings. And now, here he was, standing in front of me in this strange, otherworldly place. "You are wondering why I am here," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "You are at the brink of death, and you have questions." I nodded slowly. There was so much I wanted to ask, but my mind was racing, and I couldn't form the words. Muhammad stepped closer, and the light around him dimmed. His expression changed, becoming more serious, almost grave. "You must listen to me carefully," he said. "Islam is a lie. I was deceived, and in turn, I deceived many. My followers believe that by following my teachings, they will find paradise. But they are wrong. The true path lies elsewhere, and if you do not find it, you will be lost forever. I stood there, stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was this really Muhammad, the same man millions of people followed? And now he was telling me that everything they believed was a lie? But why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked away, as if ashamed. Because I am in hell, he said quietly, and I don't want anyone else to suffer the same fate. I was wrong. Jesus is the truth, the only way, but many will not listen, and they will perish. The weight of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had never thought much about Islam, or any other religion for that matter. But now, standing here in the presence of this man, I realized that this was no ordinary encounter. This was a warning, and it was up to me to heed it. As I stood there, holding his hand, the warmth and peace continued to flood my soul. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced before, a sense of belonging, of finally understanding something so much greater than myself. For the first time in my life, I felt like I knew the truth. The doubts that had clouded my mind for so long were gone, replaced by a certainty I couldn't explain. Jesus looked at me with those kind eyes and said, "Your time here is not over, Goran. You must return to the world of the living. There is still work for you to do." I didn't want to leave. This place, this feeling of being in the presence of God, was something I had never thought possible. The thought of going back to my life, my mundane existence, seemed unbearable compared to the beauty and peace I had found here. "But I don't want to go," I whispered, my voice trembling. Jesus smiled again, a smile full of understanding. "I know, but you must. You have been given a second chance. Go and share what you have learned. Tell the world the truth, so that others may find their way to me before it is too late." I looked at him, tears streaming down my face. How could I do that? How could I possibly go back to the world after seeing what I had seen, knowing what I now knew? But deep down I realized he was right. My journey wasn't over. There were others who needed to hear this message, to understand the truth before they fell into the abyss. Before I could say another word, the world around me began to shift again. The light faded, and the peaceful meadow dissolved into darkness. I felt a strange pulling sensation, as if I was being yanked backward, and in the blink of an eye, I was falling through the void. I gasped, sucking in a deep breath as my eyes flew open. The first thing I saw was the bright fluorescent lights of the hospital room above me. The beeping of machines filled my ears, and the sterile smell of antiseptic invaded my senses. For a moment I was disoriented, unsure of where I was or what had just happened. Then it all came flooding back, the pain, the collapse, the abyss, Muhammad's warning, and the encounter with Jesus. I tried to sit up, but my body was weak. I groaned softly, and that's when I heard her voice. "Goran, you're awake!" Milena was by my side, her face pale and tear-streaked, but her eyes were filled with relief. She reached out and grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly. "Thank God," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I thought I had lost you." I looked at her, still trying to make sense of everything. "How long?" I managed to ask, my throat dry and my voice hoarse. "You were out for 2 days," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The doctors said it was a heart attack, but it was unlike anything they had seen. You were gone, Goran. No pulse, no heartbeat for nearly 10 minutes. 10 minutes? I stared at her in shock. No pulse for 10 minutes? I should have been dead, but I wasn't. I had been given a second chance, just like Jesus had said. I looked around the room, taking in the machines that were monitoring my vitals, the IV drip in my arm, the nurses and doctors moving about. Everything felt surreal, like I was caught between two worlds. I had been to the edge of death, and now I was back. But the experience was still so fresh in my mind that it felt more real than the room I was lying in. I need to tell you something," I whispered to Milena, my voice shaking. She looked at me with concern. "What is it?" I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. How could I possibly explain what had happened? How could I make her understand the warning I had been given, the truth I had seen? "I saw something," I began, my voice faltering. "While I was gone, I saw things. I met people." Milena's eyes widened and she leaned in closer. "What do you mean? What did you see?" "I saw Muhammad. I said, the words sounding strange even to me. He warned me, he told me that Islam is a lie, that he was wrong, and now he's suffering in hell because of it. Melina gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Muhammad, are you sure? I nodded, my heart pounding. Yes, he was there, and he told me that I had to follow the true path, or I would be lost too. He said Jesus is the only way. Melina was silent for a moment, her eyes wide with shock. I knew it sounded unbelievable, but I had to tell her the truth. I had been given this message for a reason, and I couldn't keep it to myself. I saw Jesus too, I continued, my voice growing stronger. He saved me. He told me that I still had time to choose the right path, but that many people are being led astray. We have to follow him, Melina. He is the only way to heaven. Tears filled her eyes as she listened, and she squeezed my hand tightly. Oh, Goran, she whispered. I knew there was more to what happened. I knew God had a reason for bringing you back. I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of the message I had been given. I had seen the truth with my own eyes, and now it was my responsibility to share it with others. But I also knew that it wouldn't be easy. There would be people who wouldn't believe me, people who would reject the message just like I had rejected faith for so long. But I had no choice. I had been to the edge of death, and I had seen what awaited those who followed the wrong path. I couldn't stay silent. Over the next few weeks, as I recovered in the hospital and eventually returned home, the experience weighed heavily on my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen and the message Jesus had given me. I knew that I had to share it, but I didn't know where to begin. Melina was supportive, as always. She listened patiently as I told her more about my experience, and together we prayed for guidance. I started going to church again, something I hadn't done in years, and as I sat in the pews listening to the priest speak, I realized how much I had missed. The truth had been in front of me all along, but I had ignored it, distracted by the busyness of life. Now I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had been given a second chance, and I knew that I had to use it wisely. One evening, as we sat together in our living room, I turned to Melina. I think I need to tell others, I said quietly. Not just you, everyone. People need to know the truth. Melina nodded, her eyes full of understanding. You're right, she said softly. But how will you do it? I hadn't figured that part out yet. How does someone share something so personal, so unbelievable with the world? But then I remembered what Jesus had said. Go and share what you have learned. Tell the world the truth. It wasn't about how I felt or how difficult it might be. It was about the message. And if I could save even one person from falling into the abyss, it would be worth it. I'll find a way, I said, determination filling my voice. I have to. After much thought and prayer, I realized that the best way to share my story was to speak to my community first. I knew the people in my small town, and many of them knew me. They would listen, even if they didn't understand right away. But how could I get them to believe that what I had experienced was real? I decided to speak to our local priest, Father Dimitri. He had known me since I was a child, and though I had not been to church regularly in years, I knew he would listen. I hoped that he could offer me guidance or perhaps a way to reach others. One Sunday after the liturgy, I approached him as he stood near the altar, talking with some parishioners. When he saw me, his face lit up with surprise. Goran, it's been so long, he said warmly, shaking my hand. Yes, Father, I replied, my heart racing. I've been through something I need to talk to you about. He led me into a small side room where we could speak in private. As I sat down, I could feel my hands trembling. How would he react to what I had to say? Would he think I was crazy? I had a near-death experience, I began, my voice shaky but determined. I was gone for 10 minutes, Father. The doctors said there was no heartbeat. But during that time, I saw things I can't explain. Father Dimitri's expression became serious, and he listened intently as I told him about the abyss, the encounter with Muhammad, and my conversation with Jesus. I explained the warning I had received about Islam and the lies it spread, and how Jesus had told me that he is the only way to salvation. When I finished, there was a long silence. Father Dimitri sat back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. I braced myself for his response, unsure of what he would say. Goran, he said slowly, what you have experienced is powerful. Near-death experiences are rare, but they do happen, And while I cannot claim to understand fully what you went through, I believe that God has given you this vision for a reason. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. He believed me. Or at least, he believed that what I had seen had a purpose. You must share this with others, he continued, but you must do it carefully. People may be skeptical, or they may even react with hostility. Faith is a deeply personal matter, and challenging someone's beliefs can be difficult. But if God has called you to this, then you must obey. I nodded, my resolve strengthening. How do I begin? Father Dimitri smiled gently. Start with those closest to you. Speak to your neighbors, your friends. Tell them what you have seen, and let them decide for themselves. But above all, pray for guidance and trust that God will lead you. The next day, I began reaching out to people in the town. It started small. I spoke to a few neighbors, explaining my experience and the message I had been given. At first, many were shocked. Some didn't know what to say, and others reacted with skepticism, but most listened politely. I could see the doubt in their eyes, but I didn't let it discourage me. I knew that what I had seen was real, and I had to keep going. Word spread quickly through the town. Soon, more people were approaching me, asking to hear my story. Some were curious, others were concerned, but all of them listened. I told them about the warning I had received from Muhammad and the truth I had learned from Jesus. I spoke about the abyss, the souls I had seen suffering, and the certainty that there was no other way to heaven except through Christ. One evening, as I sat with Milena at the dinner table, she looked at me with a mixture of pride and concern. People are talking about you, she said softly. Some are inspired, but others, they don't believe you. I sighed, nodding. I knew it wouldn't be easy, I replied, but I have to keep going. They have to know the truth. Milena reached across the table and took my hand. I believe in you, she said firmly, and I believe that what you're doing is right. Just don't lose heart. Her words gave me strength. I continued to share my story, but as Father Dimitri had warned, there were challenges. Some people openly mocked me, accusing me of trying to spread lies. Others refused to listen, too set in their ways to consider the possibility that what they believed might be wrong. It was disheartening, but I reminded myself of the mission I had been given. One night, as I lay in bed, exhausted from another long day of trying to reach people, I prayed for guidance. Lord, I whispered, I don't know if I'm doing this right. I don't know if I'm reaching anyone. Please show me the way. The next morning, something unexpected happened. I received a phone call from a journalist in a nearby city. He had heard about my story through a friend and wanted to interview me. At first, I was hesitant. The thought of sharing my experience with a wider audience made me nervous, but I realized this was the opportunity I had been praying for. This could be a way to reach even more people. I agreed to the interview, and a few days later, the journalist arrived at my home. He was a young man named Stefan, with a friendly smile but a skeptical look in his eyes. He set up his recording equipment, and after a few pleasantries, he got straight to the point. So, Goran, he said, leaning forward, tell me about your experience. What exactly happened? I took a deep breath and began to recount my story once more. I spoke about the heart attack, the dark place I had found myself in, and the warning from Muhammad. I described the abyss and the suffering souls, and finally I spoke about Jesus, his message of salvation, and the truth I had learned. As I spoke, Stefan's expression changed. The skepticism in his eyes faded, replaced by something else, something that looked like curiosity, or perhaps even belief. When I finished, there was a long pause. That's quite a story, he said finally. And you're certain it was real? I'm certain, I replied firmly. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't my imagination. I was shown these things for a reason, and that reason is to warn others. Stefan nodded slowly. I'll write the article, he said, his voice thoughtful. I don't know how people will react, but I'll tell your story. I thanked him, and after he left, I sat in silence for a long time. I didn't know what the outcome of the interview would be, but I felt a sense of peace. I had done what I could, and now it was in God's hands. A few weeks after the interview was published, everything changed. The article was picked up by a national news outlet, and suddenly my story was everywhere. People from all over the country were contacting me, some with questions, others with words of encouragement. But there were also those who were angry. accusing me of trying to spread lies about their faith. It wasn't easy. The backlash was intense, but so were the messages of support. I heard from people who had been questioning their beliefs, people who had been searching for the truth, and they told me that my story had opened their eyes. Melina and I prayed every night, asking for strength and guidance as we navigated this new reality. I knew that I had been given a responsibility, and I couldn't back down now. The message I had received was too important. As the months passed, I began speaking at churches and events, sharing my experience with anyone who would listen. Each time I told my story, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was the mission Jesus had given me, and I was determined to fulfill it. One evening, as I sat by the window of our home, watching the sunset over the hills, Melina came and sat beside me. She rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "You've done so much, Goran. I'm so proud of you." I smiled, grateful for her unwavering support. "I couldn't have done it without you," I replied. As I looked out at the fading light, I thought about the journey I had been on. I had seen the edge of hell, and I had spoken to Jesus himself. I had been given a second chance at life, and I had made it my mission to share the truth with the world. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. The truth I had learned was too important to keep to myself. I would continue to share it, no matter the cost, because I had seen with my own eyes what awaited those who were led astray, and I would not let them fall into the abyss. If this story has moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated. There are many more stories like this, and you don't want to miss them. Share this message and help spread the truth.